Lena wasn't born into a world of color or light, but that didn't mean her world was empty. From the moment she took her first breath in a modest home tucked between live oaks and magnolia trees in southern Louisiana, sound became her eyes. She never saw the golden sunsets that painted the bayou in fiery oranges and purples, but she heard them, the way the cicadas hummed louder as dusk fell, how the frogs began their nightly chorus in the marshes behind her house, and the soft creak of the porch swing where her grandmother would sit, humming old spirituals under her breath. Her parents didn't have much. Her father worked long shifts at a shipyard, and her mother cleaned offices downtown, but they gave her everything they could: love, patience, and a deep belief that her blindness wasn't a wall, just a different kind of doorway. They never treated her like she was fragile. Instead, they taught her to walk with confidence, to listen closely, and to trust her hands as much as someone else might trust their eyes. It was her grandmother, though, who first noticed the music in her. Not just that she liked it, but that it lived inside her like a second heartbeat. When Lena was 3, she sat on the worn rug in the living room, head tilted, as her grandmother played a simple hymn on their old upright piano. The instrument had seen better days. Some keys stuck, others were yellowed with age. But to Lena, it sounded like magic. After the last note faded, she crawled over, reached up, and pressed a single key. Then another, and another. Within minutes, she'd played the melody back, note for note, rhythm perfect, even the little pause before the final chord. Her grandmother froze. "Child," she whispered, "you hear more than most folks with 2 good eyes." From that day on, the piano became Lena's playground, her classroom, her sanctuary. She didn't read sheet music, not yet, but she didn't need to. She'd hear a song on the radio while her mother cooked red beans and rice, and by dinner, she'd be playing it with her own little twists. A jazzier rhythm here, a bluesy bend there. Neighbors would stop by just to listen. "That girl's got the spirit in her fingers," one elderly man said, shaking his head in wonder. By the time she was 6, Lena could play anything she heard. Gospel hymns from Sunday service? Done. The theme from a cartoon on Saturday morning? She'd have it down before the commercials. Even the sound of rain on the tin roof. She once tried to mimic it on the piano using soft staccato notes in the high register, then rolling thunder in the bass. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And that honesty moved people. Her parents knew this gift needed more than just a beat-up piano in their living room. They wanted her to learn properly, to understand theory, technique, the history of the music she loved so deeply. But lessons cost money they didn't have. Still, they saved. Her father took extra shifts. Her mother started selling homemade pralines at the weekend market. Every dollar went into a coffee can labeled Lena's Music. When she turned 7, they finally had enough for a few months of lessons at a small community center that offered classes for children with disabilities. The teacher, a retired music professor named Mrs. Delaney, was in her 70s with silver hair and a voice as warm as honey. She'd taught sighted students for decades, but something about Lena made her heart skip. At their first meeting, Mrs. Delaney played a short piece, just a simple scale with a little flourish at the end. Lena listened, then walked over to the piano. She'd already memorized the layout of the room from the echo of footsteps and the smell of old books and lemon polish, and played it back. Then she added a harmony line Mrs. Delaney hadn't played, something richer, more emotional. "You've never had formal training?" Mrs. Delaney asked, stunned. "No, ma'am," Lena said softly, fingers still resting on the keys. "But I've been listening my whole life." Mrs. Delaney didn't charge them after that. She said it was her honor to teach someone who heard music the way Lena did, not as notes on a page, but as stories, as feelings, as breath. Under Mrs. Delaney's guidance, Lena began to read Braille music. It was slow at first, each symbol had to be memorized, each rhythm felt with the fingertips. But Lena didn't mind the slowness. She liked the way the raised dots felt under her skin, like tiny stars guiding her through a song. She learned about composers, how Beethoven wrote symphonies after he went deaf, how Clara Schumann defied society to become a concert pianist in a man's world, how Duke Ellington turned Harlem Nights into sound. But more than technique, Mrs. Delaney taught her something deeper, that music wasn't about showing off. It was about connection. You play, she'd say, not to impress, but to reach someone's heart. Even if they don't understand the notes, they'll understand the truth in them. Lena took those words to heart. She started playing at church, Not just during service, but sometimes late at night when the building was empty, just her and the old pipe organ echoing in the high ceilings. She played for her neighbors when someone was sick or grieving. Once, after a bad storm knocked out power for days, she played on the porch by lantern light so the kids on the block wouldn't be scared of the dark. People began to talk, not in a flashy way, but in quiet, respectful tones. "That blind girl down on Cypress Street? She plays like an angel who's seen heaven." Teachers at her school asked her to perform at assemblies. Local radio even did a short feature on her. "The girl who paints with sound," they called her. But fame wasn't what she wanted. She just loved the piano, the cool smoothness of the keys, the way the wood vibrated when she played deep chords, the silence that followed a perfect phrase, thick with emotion. To her, the piano wasn't an instrument. It was a friend who never judged, never mocked, never told her she couldn't do something because she couldn't see. Still, life wasn't always easy. Kids at school sometimes didn't know how to act around her. Some were kind, others awkward, a few outright cruel. "How can you play if you can't even see the keys?" One boy sneered during a music class. Lena didn't respond. She just sat down, played a fast, intricate ragtime piece she'd learned from an old recording, and walked away while the class clapped. That shut him up. Her parents always reminded her, "Don't let anyone make you feel small for seeing the world differently." And she didn't. Instead, she poured every hurt, every doubt, every joy into her music. When she was sad, she played Chopin. When she was happy, she played New Orleans jazz. When she was angry, she played thunderous Bach. By the time she was 14, she'd outgrown what Mrs. Delaney could teach her. The old teacher, with tears in her eyes, told her, "You're ready for more than this town can give you. You need to go where the music lives, the big conservatories, the concert halls, the places where people live and breathe this art." Lena was scared. She'd never been far from home. The thought of navigating a big city, strangers, complex buildings, it made her stomach twist. But she also knew this was her path. Music wasn't just a hobby. It was her voice. Her parents, though heartbroken at the idea of her leaving, supported her completely. They applied for every scholarship they could find. They recorded her playing, gospel, classical improvisations, and sent the tapes with trembling hands. Months passed with no word. Then, one rainy afternoon, a letter arrived. It was from an international music academy for gifted young artists with visual impairments, located in a quiet part of the Midwest. They'd heard her recording. They were offering her a full scholarship, including room, board, and private instruction from world-class teachers. Lena read the letter aloud to her family, her voice shaking. Her mother cried. Her father hugged her so tight she could hear his heartbeat. Her grandmother just smiled and said, "I told you that piano knew your name before you did." Packing was bittersweet. She folded her clothes slowly, touched each object in her room one last time. The smooth edge of her childhood music box, the rough bark of the oak tree outside her window, the cool metal of her white cane. She wasn't leaving because she wanted to escape. She was leaving because she had something to give the world, and the world, she hoped, was ready to listen. On the morning of her departure, the whole neighborhood came out to see her off. Someone played a trumpet, someone else sang a hymn. As she walked to the car, cane tapping lightly on the pavement, she heard the sound of a dozen hands clapping, not out of pity, but pride. She didn't know what waited for her beyond her hometown. But she knew one thing for certain. Wherever she went, as long as there was a piano, she'd never be lost. Because music wasn't something she did, it was who she was. And no darkness inside or out could ever silence that. The train ride to Vienna felt like stepping into a dream Lena hadn't known she was having. She'd never been outside the southern United States before, let alone across an ocean. The hum of the airplane, the strange taste of airline food, the crisp chill of European air when she stepped off the plane. It all felt surreal, like she was moving through someone else's story. But her fingers kept returning to the small leather case in her lap, the one holding her Braille scores and a recording of her playing Chopin. That was real. That was hers. She was met at the station by a kind-faced woman from the program who spoke gently and guided her through the winding streets of the city. Vienna smelled different, like old stone, fresh bread, and something faintly floral drifting from hidden courtyards. The sounds were layered. Horse-drawn carriages clopping on cobblestones, distant violins from open windows, the murmur of languages she didn't understand. It was overwhelming but also thrilling. This was a city that lived and breathed music. Beethoven had walked these streets. Mozart had played in these halls. And now she was here too. The masterclass was held in a grand old building that once belonged to a noble family. High ceilings, polished wood floors, and the soft echo of footsteps made it feel like a cathedral. Lena was given a room on the second floor, with tall windows that let in cool morning light she couldn't see but could feel on her skin. Her roommate, a cheerful violinist from Japan who also couldn't see, quickly became a friend. They practiced together in the evenings, laughing when they accidentally played in the wrong key or mimicked their teacher's accents. For the first week, everything felt like a gift. The instructors were patient. The other students were respectful. Even the food, strange at first, grew on her. She practiced for hours every day, not because she had to, but because the pianos here were magnificent. Each one sang differently, and she loved learning their voices. One was bright and clear like morning light. Another was deep and warm like a lullaby. Then came the day Victor Reinhardt arrived. His name had been whispered since the program began. A legend, a genius, a man who'd played for presidents and royalty, whose recordings sold millions, whose interpretations of Liszt and Rachmaninoff were considered definitive. But along with the praise came quieter warnings. He's brilliant, but he doesn't suffer fools. He can be harsh. Don't take it personally if he tears you apart. He does it to everyone. Lena tried not to be nervous. She reminded herself that she wasn't here to impress him. She was here to learn. Still, when she heard his footsteps enter the hall that morning, sharp, confident, echoing like a metronome, her stomach tightened. The room fell silent. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. He spoke without greeting anyone. "We're here to refine art, not to coddle amateurs," he said, his voice smooth but edged with steel. "If you're here for praise, leave now. If you're here to be transformed, sit down and play something that matters." One by one, students performed. A boy from Germany played a fiery Prokofiev sonata. A girl from Brazil offered a delicate Debussy prelude. Victor listened with his eyes closed, arms crossed, face unreadable. After each piece, he gave sharp, precise feedback, sometimes kind, often brutal. "Your left hand lacks intention. You're rushing the climax like you're late for dinner. Where is the soul in this?" "I hear fingers, not feeling." Then it was Lena's turn. She stood slowly, gripping her cane. She could feel dozens of eyes on her. The other students, the assistant teachers, even the janitor who'd paused in the doorway. She walked to the grand piano at the front of the room, her steps steady despite the tremor in her chest. She'd chosen Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opera 9, No. 2, a piece she'd loved since she was 10. It was tender, lyrical, full of longing. She'd played it at her grandmother's funeral. It felt like home. She sat, placed her hands on the keys, took a breath, and began. From the first note, the room softened. The melody floated out, gentle, flowing, like moonlight on water. She didn't just play the notes. She let them breathe. She lingered on certain phrases, not because she was slow, but because they ached with something words couldn't say. Her right hand sang while her left hand cradled the harmony like a lullaby. She wasn't showing off. She was sharing something private, something true. Halfway through, just as she reached the most emotional passage, the part where the music swells like a heart breaking open, Victor's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Stop." Her fingers froze. The last note hung in the silence, trembling. He stood up. His shoes clicked on the wooden floor as he walked toward her. She could hear his breath, smell the faint scent of cologne and coffee. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. A performance or a therapy session? A few nervous laughs. Lena didn't move. "You play like a child who's memorized a lullaby," he continued, his tone sharpening. "Technically, acceptable. But music isn't about hitting the right keys. It's about vision. It's about seeing the architecture of a phrase, the color of a chord, the shape of silence. And you—" He paused, and the next words landed like stones. "You have no eyes. How can you possibly understand what you're playing?" The room went ice cold. Lena's cheeks burned. Her hands, still on the keys, felt numb. She wanted to vanish, to melt into the floor. But something deeper, something forged in years of being told she couldn't, shouldn't, wouldn't, rose up inside her. She didn't cry. She didn't snap back. She simply lifted her hands from the piano, stood, and said quietly, I may not see the notes, sir, but I feel them. And maybe. That's enough. She turned and walked out, cane tapping softly against the floor, back straight, chin high. Behind her, the silence was thick. No one spoke. No one moved. Outside, the Viennese sun was warm on her face. She found a bench in a small garden behind the building and sat down, trembling. Tears finally came, not of shame, but of fury and hurt. She'd worked so hard. She'd left everything she knew to be here. And in one cruel moment, a man she'd admired had reduced her entire life to a joke. Back in her room that evening, her roommate didn't ask what happened. She just handed her a cup of tea and sat beside her in silence. After a while, Lena told her. The words came out in a rush, the mockery, the disbelief, the way the room had gone quiet like they all agreed with him. He's wrong, her roommate said simply. You know he's wrong. I do, Lena whispered. But what if part of him is right? What if I'm missing something because I can't see? No, her friend said firmly. You hear things the rest of us miss. You feel the music in your bones. That's not less. It's different. And different isn't broken. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She replayed Victor's words over and over. How can you possibly understand what you're playing? But then she remembered her grandmother's voice. Child, you hear more than most folks with two good eyes. She remembered Mrs. Delaney saying, you play to reach someone's heart. She remembered the way her neighbors used to gather on the porch just to listen. She wasn't playing for Victor. She never had been. The next morning, she returned to the practice room earlier than anyone else. She didn't play Chopin. She didn't play anything from the standard repertoire. Instead, she began to improvise. At first, it was just fragments, angry chords, mournful melodies, rhythms that echoed her heartbeat. But slowly, something new began to form, a piece that wasn't about proving herself. It was about telling her truth. She wove in the gospel harmonies of her childhood church, the syncopated bounce of New Orleans street jazz, the solemn beauty of classical form, and the raw ache of being told you don't belong. She called it Echoes of Light. Not because she saw light, but because she believed in it. Because even in total darkness, sound could carry hope. Over the next few days, she barely left the piano. She skipped meals. She ignored messages from home. She poured everything into this one piece. It wasn't perfect. Some passages were too chaotic, others too soft. But it was honest. And that honesty gave it power. Meanwhile, word of what had happened in the masterclass spread. Some students sided with Victor. He's tough, but he's right. Music requires discipline. Others were furious. A few even confronted him, though he brushed them off with a wave of his hand. Sentimentality won't win competitions, he'd say. Only rigor will. But something unexpected happened online. A student had recorded part of the exchange on their phone, just the audio, no video, and posted it anonymously. Within hours, it went viral. Headlines read, Blind pianist humiliated by maestro in masterclass while encountered genius or bully. Famous pianist mocks young artist. Comments flooded in, some defending artistic standards but far more condemning the cruelty. Talent doesn't depend on eyesight. She played with more soul in 30 seconds than he has in 30 years. This isn't critique. It's cruelty. Lena didn't see the posts. She didn't use social media much, but she felt the shift. People looked at her differently in the halls. Some avoided her, embarrassed. Others nodded with quiet respect. A few slipped notes under her door. Keep playing. We're listening. Victor, for his part, seemed unmoved. He gave no interviews, made no apology. In the next session, he acted as if nothing had happened, calling on other students, dissecting their performances with the same icy precision. But Lena noticed something. When she entered the room, he didn't look at her. Not once. She didn't care.
She had her music.
And she had a decision to make. The program director called her into his office a week later. He was a gentle man with a soft voice and a deep love for music. There's a competition coming up, he said. The Global Young Artists Showcase. It's held here in Vienna in the concert house. Judges include critics, conservatory heads, and Victor Reinhardt. Lena's breath caught. It's prestigious, he continued. Winning could open every door for you, but I understand if you don't want to participate. After what happened, she was quiet for a long time. She thought about going home, about staying safe in the world she knew. But then she thought about every time someone had told her she couldn't play piano, couldn't travel alone, couldn't belong in a place like this. "I'll do it," she said. The director smiled. "What will you play?" She didn't hesitate. "Something new, something mine," he nodded. "Then let the world hear it." In the weeks that followed, Lena refined Echoes of Light. She worked with a composer who helped her transcribe it into Braille notation. She practiced until her fingers ached and her back stiffened. She played it for her roommate, for her teachers, even for the janitor who'd heard her that first day. Each time people were moved, some to tears, others to silence. One evening, as she played the final section, a quiet, rising sequence that ended not with a bang, but with a single, sustained note that faded into silence, her roommate whispered, "It's like you're telling the whole world, I'm here, and I matter." Lena smiled. "That's exactly what I'm saying." She didn't know if Victor would listen. She didn't know if the judges would understand. But she knew one thing, this piece wasn't for them. It was for every blind child who'd been told their dreams were too big. For every person who'd been made to feel small. For her grandmother, who first heard the music in her. For herself. And when the night of the competition arrived, she walked onto that stage not as a victim, not as a symbol, but as an artist, ready to speak in the only language she'd ever truly trusted. The hall was full. The air buzzed with anticipation. She could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on her as she made her way to the piano. Her cane tapped lightly. Her heart pounded. But her hands were calm, because this time she wasn't playing to be accepted. She was playing to be heard. After the masterclass, the world seemed to shrink around her. Not in a comforting way, but like the walls were closing in, pressing on her chest every time she remembered the sound of his voice cutting through her music like a blade. She didn't cry in front of anyone. She kept her head high in the hallways, nodded politely when people whispered behind her back, and even managed a small smile when her roommate handed her tea with extra honey, knowing it was her favorite. But inside something had cracked. She stopped playing for others. Not out of shame, but because the piano had always been her safe place, and now even that felt tainted. Every time she sat down, she heard his words echoing in the silence between the notes. "How can you possibly understand what you're playing?" It wasn't just doubt he'd planted. It was a question that slithered into her bones and wouldn't let go. For days, she wandered the city alone, cane tapping softly on the cobblestones, letting the sounds of Vienna wash over her, the clink of coffee cups in cafes, the distant hum of street musicians, the rustle of leaves in the stat park. She didn't go to practice rooms. She didn't open her Braille scores. She just walked, listened, and tried to remember who she was before that room, before those words. One rainy afternoon, she found herself outside a small church tucked between two bookshops. The door was open, and warm light spilled onto the wet sidewalk. She hesitated, then stepped inside. The air smelled of old wood and candle wax. There was no one there, just rows of empty pews and a modest upright piano near the altar. Without thinking, she walked toward it, ran her fingers over the keys. They were slightly uneven, the middle C sticky, but it was real. Human, imperfect. She sat, and for the first time since the masterclass, she played. Not for a teacher, not for a competition, not to prove anything. She played because her hands missed the feel of ivory, because her heart needed to speak, and because silence had grown too heavy to carry alone. What came out wasn't Chopin. It wasn't Bach or Ellington or any of the pieces she'd spent years perfecting. It was something raw, messy, and entirely new. A low rumble in the bass, like thunder rolling through her chest. Then a hesitant melody in the right hand, searching, stumbling, like someone learning to walk again. She let her fingers wander, not worrying about rules or structure. She played the sound of being told you don't belong, the ache of wanting to be seen, not just heard, the quiet fury of being reduced to a limitation instead of a person. And then, almost without realizing it, she wove in something else. The gospel chords her grandmother used to play on Sunday mornings. The syncopated bounce of a second-line parade back home. The lullaby her mother sang when storms rolled in. These weren't just sounds. They were memories. Anchors. Proof that she'd always been more than what one man said she was. She played until her fingers cramped and the light outside faded to dusk. When she finally stood, her legs were stiff, but her mind was clear for the first time in weeks. That night, she went back to her room and opened her notebook, the one with braille pages where she'd scribbled musical ideas since she was 12. She began to shape what she'd played in the church into something whole. Not a showpiece, not a weapon, just a story. Her story. She called it Echoes of Light. It wasn't about sight. It was about presence, about how even in total darkness you can still feel warmth, hear truth, and create beauty. The piece started in shadow, deep rumbling chords that felt like loneliness. Then a single voice emerged in the high register, fragile but persistent like a candle flame in a windstorm. As it grew, it gathered strength, weaving through jazz rhythms, classical harmonies, and spirituals until it became something vast and alive, a tapestry of everything she was. She didn't tell anyone what she was working on. Not even her roommate. She'd slip into the practice room before dawn, when the building was quiet and the only sound was the distant hum of the city waking up. She'd play for hours, refining, reworking, sometimes scrapping entire sections and starting over. Some days it felt like the music was fighting her. Other days it flowed like a river she'd finally learned to swim in. One morning, an older man she'd never seen before paused outside her open door. He was one of the guest composers brought in for the program, gray-haired, soft-spoken, known for writing music that felt like whispered secrets. He listened for nearly 10 minutes without saying a word. When she finished, he cleared his throat gently. "That's yours?" he asked. She nodded, suddenly shy. "It's honest," he said, "and rare. Most young players try to impress. You're trying to connect." She didn't know what to say, so she just thanked him. He came back the next day, and the next. Soon, they were working together, him helping her notate the piece properly, suggesting ways to balance the textures, showing her how to use silence as powerfully as sound. He never told her what to write. He just helped her say it clearer. "You don't need to shout to be heard," he told her once. "Sometimes the softest note carries the farthest." As the weeks passed, something shifted in her. The anger didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It became fuel, not fear. She stopped replaying Victor's words in her head. Instead, she thought about the little girl back home who played Rain on the piano, the grandmother who said music lived in her bones, the neighbors who gathered on the porch just to listen. She wasn't playing to win his approval. She was playing for them, for herself. Still, doubt crept in sometimes. Late at night, when the dorm was quiet and the weight of what she was about to do pressed down on her, she'd wonder, what if no one understands it? What if they hear it and think it's just noise? What if I'm not enough? But then she'd sit at the piano, even in the dark, and play a few bars about Echoes of Light. And the music would answer, "You are." News of the competition spread through the program like wind through dry grass. The Global Young Artist Showcase wasn't just any event. It was televised in parts of Europe, attended by critics, agents, and conservatory directors from around the world. Winning could mean recordings, tours, a career. But for Lena, it meant something simpler, a chance to speak without being interrupted. When the program director asked what she planned to perform, she told him. He listened to a rough recording she'd made with the composer's help. When it ended, he was quiet for a long time. "This is risky," he finally said. "It's not standard repertoire. The judges might not know what to make of it." "I know," she replied. "But if I play something safe, I'm proving him right. That I'm just copying what I've heard. This is mine, and if they don't like it, fine. But they'll hear me," he nodded slowly. "Then I'll make sure you have the best piano they've got." In the final days before the competition, she barely slept. She practiced until her fingers were raw, then soaked them in warm water with lavender oil, just like her mother used to do when she was a child. She memorized every nuance, the exact pressure needed for the gospel chord in measure 42, the slight pause before the jazz break in the third movement, the way the final note should hang in the air like a question left open. Her roommate helped her rehearse stage presence, how to walk confidently, how to bow, how to sit without fumbling. "You've got this," she'd say every night. "They're going to lose their minds." Lena tried to believe her. The night before the performance, she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, listening to the city breathe. Somewhere far off, a saxophone played a lonely tune. She thought about home, the smell of magnolia blossoms, the sound of crickets at dusk, the way her father's laugh filled the whole house. She missed it fiercely. But she also knew she couldn't go back the same person she'd been when she left. Too much had happened. Too much had been taken, and too much had been found. She touched the small locket her grandmother had given her before she passed, a smooth piece of metal with nothing inside. Just a reminder that love doesn't need to be seen to be real. She wore it now, tucked under her shirt, cool against her skin. The next morning she dressed carefully, a simple black dress, comfortable shoes, her hair pulled back neatly, no makeup, no jewelry except the locket. She didn't want anything to distract from the music. As she walked to the concert house, the sun was warm on her face. The streets were busy, but she moved through them with quiet purpose. She could feel the energy of the city shifting. Today was different. Today something important was about to happen. Backstage, the air buzzed with nerves and excitement. Other performers paced, hummed scales, adjusted their clothes. Someone dropped a music stand and the clatter echoed like a gunshot. Lena sat in a corner, hands resting in her lap, breathing slowly. She didn't need to warm up. Her hands knew the piece by heart. Her soul had been rehearsing it for years. A stagehand approached. 5 minutes, he whispered. She nodded, then a voice she hadn't expected to hear. May I speak with you? She turned. It was Victor, her breath caught. She couldn't see him, but she could feel his presence, tall, still, radiating the same intensity she remembered from the masterclass. For a moment she thought he was going to say something cruel again, but his voice when it came was quieter than she'd ever heard it. I heard you've written something new, he said. She didn't answer right away. Yet, aren't you afraid? He asked, to play your own work, in front of judges who expect tradition? I'm more afraid of playing someone else's music and losing myself in it, she said simply. He was silent for a long moment. Then so softly she almost missed it. I hope it's good. And then he walked away. She didn't know what to make of it. An apology? A challenge? Or just curiosity? It didn't matter. In a few minutes she'd be on stage, and the only voice that would matter was the one coming from her hands. She stood, straightened her dress, gripped her cane. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about showing the world and herself that her blindness wasn't a lack. It was a lens, a different way of seeing sound, of feeling rhythm, of understanding music not as notes on a page, but as life itself. And as she stepped toward the curtain, heart pounding but hands steady, she knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, she was ready. The backstage air was thick with the kind of quiet that only comes before something big is about to happen. Not silence, never true silence, but a hush woven from nervous breaths, rustling fabric, and the distant murmur of an audience settling into velvet seats. Lena stood just behind the heavy red curtain, her cane folded neatly at her side, her fingers resting lightly against the cool wood of the piano waiting in the wings. She didn't need to see the hall to know it was full. She could feel it in the way the floor vibrated with the weight of hundreds of people, in the soft rustle of programs being opened, in the low hum of anticipation that buzzed like electricity in the air. She took a slow breath. In, out. Just like her grandmother had taught her when she was 6 and too scared to play for the church ladies. Nerves are just your heart saying you care, the old woman used to say. Let it care. Then let your hands do the talking. A stagehand touched her elbow gently. It's your turn. She nodded, stepped forward, and let the curtain part just enough for her to pass through. The moment she entered the spotlight, the world seemed to hold its breath. She could feel the heat of the lights on her skin, hear the soft gasp of surprise from some in the crowd, maybe because she was young, maybe because of the white cane she carried with quiet dignity, maybe because they'd heard the rumors about what had happened in the masterclass. But she didn't flinch. She walked with steady steps, counting the paces in her head, 23 from the wings to the center of the stage, just as she'd practiced. When she reached the grand piano, she paused, ran her fingers over the smooth curve of the lid, then the cool ivory of the keys. This wasn't just any instrument. It was a concert Steinway, tuned that morning by a master technician who'd whispered, "She deserves the best," when he heard who would be playing it. She sat, adjusted the bench, placed her hands in her lap for just a moment, palms up, as if offering them to the silence. Then she began. The first notes of Echoes of Light were so soft they were almost a secret, deep, resonant chords in the bass that rumbled like distant thunder, slow and heavy with memory. The audience leaned in, straining to hear. She didn't rush. She let the sound bloom in the vast space, let it fill the corners of the hall like smoke. This wasn't music meant to impress. It was music meant to invite. Then came the melody. A single line in the right hand, fragile at first, like a voice finding its courage. It wasn't flashy. It didn't leap across octaves or race through scales. It simply spoke. And what it said was this: I am here. I have always been here. As the piece unfolded, it carried the audience through landscapes only sound could paint. There was the gospel warmth of Sunday mornings, rich, rolling harmonies that swelled like a congregation rising to its feet. Then a sudden shift, a syncopated rhythm, bright and playful like a New Orleans street parade bursting into life, full of brass and laughter and the clatter of dancing feet. She played it with joy, with swing, with a grin tugging at the corner of her lips even as her fingers flew. But then, just as quickly, the mood shifted again. The music grew darker, more searching. Dissonant chords clashed like unanswered questions. Her left hand hammered out a rhythm that sounded like a heartbeat racing in fear. This was the part she'd written after the masterclass, the part that held the sting of being told she didn't belong. It wasn't angry. It was wounded, and in that wound there was truth. Halfway through, something remarkable happened. Victor, sitting stiffly in the front row of judges, stopped taking notes. His pen hovered over the page, then lowered. His arms, which had been crossed like armor, slowly uncrossed. He leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on her hands. He wasn't judging anymore. He was listening, and he wasn't the only one. In the third movement, Lena wove everything together, the gospel, the jazz, the classical structure, the raw emotion, into a tapestry so rich it felt alive. Her fingers danced and wept and shouted and whispered all at once. She wasn't just playing the piano. She was having a conversation with it, and the piano was answering in kind, its wood vibrating, its strings singing back to her like an old friend. The final section began with a single note, middle C, held so long it seemed to stretch time itself. Then slowly other notes joined it, one by one building a chord that was both simple and profound. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't a happy ending. It was an offering. A question left open. Can you hear me now? When the last note faded, so soft it disappeared like a breath into the air, the hall was utterly still. No coughing. No shifting in seats. No rustling programs, just silence, and then, as if released from a spell, the audience rose. Not all at once. First one person stood, then another, until the entire hall was on its feet, clapping, some with tears streaming down their faces, others with hands pressed to their hearts. The applause wasn't polite. It wasn't routine. It was thunderous, raw, full of awe. People shouted, "Bravo," and again, and "Thank you." Not because they wanted an encore, but because they needed to say something. Anything to match the enormity of what they'd just witnessed. Lena didn't move right away. She sat with her hands resting on her knees, letting the sound wash over her. She couldn't see the standing ovation, but she could feel it. The vibration in the floor, the warmth in the air, the sheer force of human emotion pressing against her skin like a wave. And for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel small. She felt seen. She stood slowly, turned toward the audience, and bowed. Not deeply, not dramatically, just a simple, quiet nod of gratitude. Then she walked off stage, cane in hand, back straight, heart full. Back in the green room, her roommate was waiting, eyes wide, hands trembling. You did it," she whispered, pulling her into a tight hug. They lost it, everyone, even him. Lena didn't ask who she meant. She already knew. Minutes later, a staff member came in with a message. "The judges would like to speak with you." Her stomach flipped, but she nodded. She was led back to a small reception room where the panel waited. Most of them smiled warmly, offering congratulations, asking about her composition, her influences, her future plans. They spoke of her remarkable sensitivity, her unique voice, her courage. But Victor stood apart near the window, arms at his sides now, face unreadable. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't offer praise. He didn't apologize. He simply said, "That piece, where did it come from?" She met his voice with calm. "From my life." He was quiet for a long moment. Then so softly only she could hear, "I thought music needed eyes to see its shape. But you You showed me it only needs a heart to feel its truth. It wasn't a grand speech. It wasn't a public apology. But coming from him, it was everything. Later that night, long after the award ceremony she'd won unanimously, long after the interviews and the photos and the well-wishers, Lena sat alone in her room. The city outside was quiet. She opened the window and let the cool Viennese air drift in. Somewhere in the distance, a street musician played a soft waltz on a violin. She didn't play the piano, not yet. She just sat, holding the small trophy in her hands, feeling its weight, its smooth curves. It wasn't the prize that mattered. It was the fact that she'd walked into that hall carrying a truth only she could tell, and the world had listened. Her phone buzzed on the table. A message from home. We heard it on the radio. Mama's crying. Daddy's smiling so hard his face hurts. We love you. She smiled too. Then she picked up her locket, pressed it to her lips and whispered, "We did it, Grandma." The next morning she returned to the concert house, not for a performance, but just to sit in the empty hall. She walked to the stage, touched the piano, and played a single chord. It rang out, pure and clear, echoing in the silence. She didn't need an audience anymore. She didn't need validation. She'd already found what she came for, the quiet certainty that her voice, her music, her story mattered. And as she sat there, bathed in the golden morning light she couldn't see but could feel on her skin, she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end of her journey, it was just the beginning. The morning after the competition, the world felt different, not because anything had changed outside, but because something inside her had finally settled. Lena woke to the soft chime of church bells in the distance and the smell of fresh bread drifting up from the bakery below her window. For the first time in months, she didn't wake with a knot in her stomach or a voice in her head asking if she was enough. She just woke and breathed and smiled. News of her performance spread faster than anyone expected. Not just in classical music circles, but everywhere. A video someone had recorded from the audience, grainy, shaky, but capturing the final moments of her piece and the stunned silence that followed, went viral. Within days, millions had watched it. Headlines called it the performance that changed everything. Critics who'd never paid attention to young artists wrote essays about the emotional power of her music. Even people who didn't usually listen to piano said they'd been moved to tears. But what surprised her most wasn't the fame. It was the messages. They came from all over, emails, letters, voice notes from strangers who'd heard her story. A blind teenager in Brazil wrote, "You made me believe I can be more than what people see." A music teacher in Kenya said she'd played the recording for her students and watched them sit in silence for 10 minutes afterward, just thinking. A veteran who'd lost his sight in the war wrote, "Your music reminded me that beauty still exists even when the world goes dark." Lena read everyone. She didn't respond to all of them. There were too many. But she kept them in a folder on her phone, labeled simply, "Light." On hard days, she'd open it and listen to a voice note or reread a letter, and it would remind her why she played. Then came the invitation. It arrived in a thick envelope with elegant lettering hand-delivered to her dorm. Inside was a note from Victor, not an official letter, just a few lines written in careful script. "I was wrong. Not just about you, but about what music is. If you're willing, I'd like to collaborate, not as teacher and student, as equals. There's a tour next spring, small halls, intimate settings. Just piano. Just truth. I'd be honored if you'd join me." She read it 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her journal. She didn't say yes right away. She thought about it for days. Part of her wanted to refuse after all he'd said, after the humiliation. But another part of her remembered the look on his face during her performance, not pity, not guilt, but awe. And she remembered what her grandmother used to say. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. So she wrote back. Just 2 words, "I'm in." Their first rehearsal together was awkward. They sat at opposite ends of the piano, not quite sure how to begin. But then Victor played a simple phrase, a folk tune from his childhood, and Lena answered with a harmony that surprised even him. Slowly, tentatively, they began to build something new, not a showcase for either of them, but a conversation between 2 people who'd once been on opposite sides of a wall, now finding a door. The tour was unlike anything Lena had imagined. They played in old churches in Prague, in converted barns in rural France, in tiny concert halls in Japan where the audience sat so still you could hear a pin drop. There were no flashy lights, no giant stages, just 2 pianos, 2 people, and music that spoke without words. After each performance, Victor would introduce her not as the blind girl who amazed us, but as my partner, whose music taught me how to listen again. And Lena, in turn, never let the past define their work. She played with him not to prove a point, but because she believed in the music they were making together. Back home, life was changing too. Her parents, once hesitant about her leaving, now watched every interview with quiet pride. Her father had even started learning a little piano himself, just so he could understand what she did. "I'll never be good," he joked over the phone, "but I finally get why you love it so much." And then came the album. Echoes of Light was released 6 months after the competition. It wasn't just the competition piece. It included new compositions, duets with Victor, and even a solo version of the gospel hymn her grandmother used to play. The cover was simple, a black background with a single white line curving like a sound wave, glowing faintly, as if lit from within. It sold out in days, not because of hype, but because people connected with it. Listeners said it felt like a friend sitting beside them in their darkest hour saying, "I know. I've been there too." But Lena didn't let success change her rhythm. She still practiced every morning. She still called her parents every Sunday. She still carried her white cane, not as a symbol of limitation, but as a tool of freedom. And she made a promise to herself. No matter how far she went, she'd never forget where she came from. So she started something small. Every summer, she returned to her hometown and held a free music camp for blind and visually impaired children. She didn't call it a charity. She called it the listening room. There, kids learned to play by ear, to read Braille music, to trust their hands and their hearts. She taught them that music wasn't about perfection, it was about honesty. That a wrong note wasn't a failure, it was just part of the journey. One summer, a shy 8-year-old girl sat at the piano, fingers trembling. "What if I mess up?" she whispered. Lena knelt beside her. "Then you'll be like every great musician who ever lived," she said gently. "Messing up is how we learn. But playing from your heart? That's how you heal." The girl played. It wasn't perfect, but it was true. And when she finished, the whole room clapped, not because she was blind, but because she'd shared something real. That, Lena realized, was the real victory. Years passed. The tours continued. The albums kept coming, each one deeper, more reflective. She never chased fame. She chased connection. And in doing so, she built a life that felt like music itself, full of pauses, surprises, harmonies, and moments of quiet grace. Victor, once known for his icy precision, became softer in his later years. In interviews, he often said, "The greatest lesson I ever learned came from someone who couldn't see me but saw straight into the heart of music." He retired from solo performances but continued to collaborate with her until his health declined. On his last birthday, Lena played for him in his garden. Just the two of them under a sky full of stars neither of them could fully see, but both could feel. Today, Lena still tours, though less than before. She spends more time teaching, writing, and sitting on the porch of her small house just outside New Orleans, where the air smells like jasmine and the sound of distant jazz floats on the breeze. She has students from all over the world, some blind, some not, but all of them come for the same reason. They want to learn how to listen. She often says in interviews, "People think I play despite being blind, but I play because I'm blind. My darkness taught me to hear the light and sound." And when young musicians ask her for advice, she tells them the same thing her grandmother once told her. "Don't play to be seen, play to be felt." The world once mocked her for daring to step onto a stage she couldn't see. Now it leans in when she plays, not out of pity, but out of reverence. Because she didn't just overcome a challenge, she redefined what music could be. She proved that vision isn't in the eyes, it's in the soul. And every time her fingers touch the keys, that truth echoes, not just in concert halls, but in the hearts of everyone who's ever been told they don't belong, don't matter, or don't have a voice. Because Lena didn't just play a piano, she gave the world permission to listen differently. And in that listening, millions found their own light.